It's 10:42 p.m. on March 15th, 2023. I am reading A State and Revolution by V.I. Lenin. Section 4. The Withering Away of the State in Violent Revolution. Engels's words regarding the withering away of the state are so widely known, they are so often quoted, and so clearly reveal the essence of the customary adulterations of Marxism to look like opportunism that we must deal with them in detail. They shall quote the whole argument from which they are taking. Quote, the proletariat seizes the state power and transforms the means of production in the first instance into state property. But in doing this, it puts an end to itself as proletariat. It puts an end to all class differences and class antagonisms. It puts an end also to the state as state. Former society, moving in class antagonisms, has need of the state, that is, an organization of the exploiting class at each period for the maintenance of its external conditions in production. That is, therefore, mainly for the forcible holding down of the exploited class in the conditions of oppression, slavery, villeinage, or serfdom, wage labor, determined by the existing mode of production. The state was the official representative of society as a whole, its summation in a visible corporation. But it was this only insofar as it was the state of that class which itself, in its epoch, represented society as a whole. In ancient times, the state of the slave-owning citizens. In the Middle Ages, the feudal nobility. In our epoch, of the bourgeoisie. When ultimately it becomes really representative of society as a whole, it makes itself superfluous. As soon as there is no longer any class of society to be held in subjection, as soon as, along with class domination and the struggle for individual existence based on the anarchy of production hitherto, the collisions and excesses arising from these have also been abolished, there is nothing more to be repressed which would make a special repressive force, a state, necessary. The first act in which the state really comes forward as a representative of society as a whole, the taking possession of the means of production in the name of society, is at the same time its latest independent act as a state. The interference of the state power in social relations becomes superfluous in one sphere after another and then ceases of itself. The government of persons is replaced by the administration of things and the direction of the processes of production. The state is not abolished, it withers away. It is from this standpoint that we must appraise the phrase free people's state, both its temporary justification for agitational purposes and its ultimate scientific inadequacy, and also the demand of the so-called anarchist that the state should be abolished overnight. Jugendduring's Revolution in Science, Anti-Dubring, pages 301 to 03, third German edition. End quote. It may be said, without fear of error, that this argument of Engels's, which is so remarkably rich in ideas, only one point has become an integral part of socialist thought among modern socialist parties, namely, that according to Marx, the state withers away, as distinct from the anarchist doctrine of the abolition of the state. To prune Marxism in such a manner as to reduce it to opportunism, for such an interpretation only leaves a vague notion of a slow, even gradual change, of absence of leaps and storms, of absences of revolution. The current widespread mass, if one may say so, conception of the withering away of the state undoubtedly means toning down, if not repudiating revolution. Such an interpretation, however, is the crudest distortion of Marxism, advantageous only to the bourgeoisie. In point of theory, it is based on a disregard for the most important circumstances and considerations indicated, say, in Engels' summary arguments we have just quoted in full. In the first place, at the very outset of his argument, Engels says that, in seizing state power, the proletariat thereby abolishes the state as state. It is not good form to ponder over the meaning of this. Generally, it is either ignored altogether or is considered to be something in the nature of Hegelian weakness on Engels' part. As a matter of fact, however, these words briefly express the experience of one of the greatest proletarian revolutions, the Paris Commune of 1871, of which we shall speak in greater detail in its proper place. As a matter of fact, Engels speaks here of the proletarian revolution abolishing the bourgeois state, while the words about the state withering away refer to the remnants of the proletarian state after the socialist revolution. According to Engels, the bourgeois state does not wither away, but is abolished by the proletariat in the course of the revolution. What withers away after this revolution is the proletarian state or semi-state. Secondly, the state is a special repressive force. Engels gives this splendid and extremely profound definition here with the utmost lucidity. And from it follows that the special repressive force for the suppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie, of millions of toilers by handfuls of the rich, must be replaced by a special repressive force for the suppression of the bourgeoisie by the proletariat, the dictatorship of the proletariat. This is precisely what is meant by abolition of the state as state. This is precisely the act of taking possession of the means of production in the name of society. And it is self-evident that such a replacement of one bourgeois special force by another proletarian special force cannot possibly take place in the form of withering away. Thirdly, in speaking of the state withering away and the even more graphic and colorful ceasing of itself, Engels refers quite clearly and definitely to the period after the state has taken possession of the means of production in the name of the whole of society, that is, after the socialist revolution. We all know that the political form of the state at that time is the most complete democracy, but it never enters the head of any of the opportunists who shamelessly distort Marxism that Engels is consequently speaking here of democracy ceasing of itself or withering away. This seems very strange at first sight, but it is incomprehensible only to those who have not pondered over the fact that democracy is also a state and that, consequently, democracy will also disappear when the state disappears. Revolution alone can abolish the bourgeois state. The state in general, i.e. the most complete democracy, can only wither away. Fourthly, after formulating his famous proposition that the state withers away, Engels at once explains specifically that this proposition is directed against both the opportunist and the anarchist. In doing this, Engels points in the forefront that conclusion drawn from the proposition that the state withers away, which is directed against the opportunist. One can wager that out of every 10,000 persons who have read or heard about the withering away of the state, 9,990 are completely unaware or do not remember that Engels directed this conclusion from the proposition not against the anarchist alone. And of the remaining 10, probably 9 do not know the meaning of free people's state or why an attack on this slogan makes an attack on the opportunist. This is how history is written. This is how a great revolutionary teaching is imperceptibly falsified and adapted to prevailing Philistinianism. The conclusion directed against the anarchist has been repeated thousands of times, vulgarized, dinned into people's heads in the shallowest form, and has acquired the strength of a prejudice, whereas the conclusions directed against the opportunist have been slurred over and forgotten. The Free People's State was a program demand and a widely current slogan of the German Social Democrats in the 70s. The slogan is devoid of all political content except for the fact that it describes the concept of a democracy in a pompous Philistine fashion. Insofar as it has hinted in a legally permissible manner at a democratic republic, Engels was prepared to justify its use for a time from an agitational point of view. But it was an opportunist slogan, for it expressed not only an embellishment of the bourgeois democracy, but also failure to understand the socialist criticism of the state in general. We are in favor of a democratic republic as the best form of the state for the proletarian under capitalism. But we have no right to forget that wage slavery is the law of the people even in the most democratic bourgeois republic. Furthermore, every state is a special force for the suppression of the oppressed class. Consequently, every state is not free and not a people's state. Marx and Engels explained this repeatedly to their party comrades in the 70s. Fifthly, this very same work of Engels's, of which everyone remembers the argument about the withering away of the state, also contains an argument of the significance of the violent revolution. Engels' historical analysis of its role becomes a veritable panegyric on violent revolution. This no one remembers. It's not good form in modern socialist parties to talk or even think about the significance of this idea, and it plays no part whatever in their daily propaganda and agitation among the masses. And yet, it is inseparably bound with the withering away of the state into one harmonious whole. Here is Engels' argument. Quote, that force, however, plays another role, other than that of a diabolical power. In history, a revolutionary role. That is, the words of Marx, it is the midwife of every old society which is pregnant with the new, that is the instrument by the aid of which the social movement forces its way through and shatters the dead, fossilized political forms. And of this there is not a word in Interdiction. It is only with sighs and groans that he admits the possibility that force will perhaps be necessary for the overthrow of the economic system of exploitation. Unfortunately, because all use of force, forsooth, demoralizes the person who uses it. And this in spite of the immense moral and spiritual impetus which has resulted from every victorious revolution. And this in Germany, where a violent collision, which indeed may be forced on the people, would at least have the advantage of wiping out the servility which has permeated the national consciousness as a result of the humiliation of the 30 Years' War. And this Parsons mode of thought, lifeless, insipid, and impotent, claims to impose itself on the most revolutionary party which history has ever known. Page 193, Third German edition, Part 2, End Chapter 4, end quote. How can this panegyric on violent revolution, which Engels insistently brought to the attention of the German Social Democrats between 1878 and 1894, i.e., right up to the time of his death, be combined with the theory of the withering away of the state to form a single doctrine? Usually the two are combined by means of eclecticism, by an unprincipled or sophistic selection made arbitrarily or to please the powers that be, of now one, now another argument, and in 99 cases out of 100, if not more often, it is the idea of the withering away that is placed in the forefront. Dialectics are replaced by eclecticism. This is the most usual, the most widespread phenomena to be met with in present-day official social democratic literature in relation to Marxism. This sort of substitution is, of course, no new thing. It was observed even in the history of classic Greek philosophy. In falsifying Marxism in opportunistic fashion, the substitution of eclecticism for dialectics is the easiest way of deceiving the masses. It gives an illusory satisfaction. It seems to take into account all sides of the process, all tendencies of development, all the conflicting influences, and so forth, whereas in reality it presents no integral and revolutionary conception of the process of social development at all. We have already said above, and shall show more fully later, that the teaching of Marx and Engels concerning the inevitability of a violent revolution refers to the bourgeois state. The latter cannot be superseded by the proletarian state, the dictatorship of the proletariat, through the process of withering away, but, as a general rule, only through a violent revolution. The panegyric Engels saying in its honor, which fully corresponds to Marx's repeated declarations, recall the concluding passages of the Property of Philosophy and the Communist Manifesto, with their proud and open proclamation of the inevitability of a violent revolution. Recall what Marx wrote nearly 30 years later in criticizing the Gotha program of 1875, when he mercilessly castigated the opportunist character of the program. This panegyric is by no means a mere impulse, a mere declamation, or a polemical sally. The necessity of systematically imbuing the masses with this, and precisely this view of violent revolution, lies at the root of all the teachings of Marx and Engels. The betrayal of their teaching by the now predominant social chauvinist and Kautskyite trends is expressed in striking relief by the neglect of such propaganda and agitation by both these trends. The supersession of the bourgeois state by the proletarian state is impossible without a violent revolution. The abolition of the proletarian state, i.e., of the state in general, is impossible except through the process of withering away. A detailed and concrete elaboration of these views was given by Marx and Engels when they studied each separate revolutionary situation, when they analyzed the lessons of the experience of each individual revolution. We shall now pass to this, undoubtedly the most important part of their teaching. Concluding on page 25 for this evening.